So they roll into the pizza slice, which again, this is just to picture in your mind what it looks like. It's kind of your stereotypical combat Iraq city. Small, narrow streets, trash in the streets, buildings really close together, threats everywhere, dirty, rundown, wires everywhere. It's kind of your stereotypical Iraqi combat city. That's exactly what it is in the pizza slice in Fallujah. They're in their perimeter, and boom, here we go to the book. The enemy sniper pulled the trigger, blasting what felt like a metal pipe through Albino's lower left abdomen. The bullet, which ricocheted off the corpsman's radio, then tore through his left lung. Albino fell to his knees, dropping his weapon and landing flat on his face in the sordid, trash-filled streets. "Motherfucker," yelled Petty, who had gotten a thumbs up from the doc a split second before. In an instant, Travis and Kubicki started running toward the wounded corpsman. "Casualty!" screamed the turret gunner of the other American Humvee. He was the only one in the vehicle to see Albino go down. Everyone in the Humvee froze. "Iraqi?" a stunned Meringue yelled out in response. Despite the sudden jolt of adrenaline, their hearts sank when they heard the gunner's response. "It's Doc!" he yelled, opening fire. "Ambush!" Travis reacted as soon as the first shot rang out. He took off running toward his wounded comrade as the thunderous sound of American turret gunfire rang out in the once quiet alleyway. Even with the enemy shooting from above, Travis didn't care about his own safety. He knew this could be his only chance to save Doc. At the other American Humvee, Meringue and Siegel also took off in Albino's direction. Though they were trained to never run towards a sniper's victim, the warrior ethos of never leaving a fallen comrade behind had overridden their sensibilities. Travis, who reached Doc first, grabbed him by the left shoulder, and Kubicki, who was running close behind, clutched Albino's right arm a few seconds later. "Come on, Doc," Travis yelled as he and the major pulled Albino closer to the Humvee. Bullets were now raining down from multiple rooftops, which meant that more insurgents had been waiting with the sniper to ambush the American Iraqi troops. The MIT team was encircled by insurgents, and without a fierce counterattack, the entire patrol was almost certainly doomed. As bedlam ensued, the Marines realized that both Iraqi vehicles in their patrol were gone. After the Iraqi soldiers heard the gunfire, the front vehicle subsequently hit an IED while trying to loop around towards a better fighting position. The Iraqis were stranded, which meant 9 Americans and their interpreter were left outnumbered in a confined, chaotic space.
Yeah, so, with Travis that day, he helped pull Doc in. Doc said, when I went to see Doc at the Bethesda Hospital, he said, I just felt this big hand come in and grab me and pull me in. And they were surrounded there, and it was the sniper was there firing away. I don't know if you're going to share, but Chuck Siegel was also wounded.
Yep.
As he came in. Actually got an email from Chuck recently, just to, so many years later, just to sort of talk about that day and what it was all about. But you can imagine that the cloud of war, chaos, confusion, nobody really knows what's going on. As I talked to the guys that were there that day, nobody was really sure where things were coming from. They just knew they were in big trouble.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things about the urban environment. It happens in all environments, but in the urban environment, you hear shots coming and you don't know where they're coming from. It's very difficult to tell because the sound reflects and refracts off the different buildings, and the sniper or the shooters can be 1 or 2 rooms deep. You just don't know where the rounds are coming from, and it's just very, very confusing.
A lot of confusion from all the guys I spoke with.
Going back to the book here, Travis and Kubicki dragged Albino out of the kill zone and closer to the vehicle's front side where the sniper couldn't deliver a fatal blow to their bleeding, gasping corpsman. As they tended to Albino's wounds, Travis saw Meringue and Siegel running toward him at full speed. Another piercing crack of gunfire abruptly echoed through the alley. In an instant, Siegel was somersaulting in midair, feeling like Mike Tyson had just punched him in the stomach and landing in the middle of the bullet-riddled street. All around, Siegel, who broke his rifle while collapsing to the ground, a hectic battle was unfolding in an eerie, slow-motion silence. Siegel's wrist convulsed with tremendous pain. The sniper was firing at the wounded Marine as he lay in the street, and the young Lance Corporal, who had just been shot in the wrist, and still unbeknownst to him, also in the stomach, would soon be dead if he didn't get in front of that Humvee. As Siegel lay powerless, unable to do anything but wait for the crushing blow of another sniper bullet, Travis pulled him out of the sniper's crosshairs. Moments later, Siegel lay next to Albino, who was still being worked on by Kubicki. So, again, if you got a sniper scenario and there's a guy down, the last thing you want to do is run over to try and help get him out of that situation. Unless you're Travis, and then that's the first thing you're going to do. By the time the confused Lance Corporal looked up into the dust, Travis was gone. He'd already run back into a cloud of bullets. Travis dashed across the street, not far from where Siegel had been hit twice and Meringue had barely escaped death. Without blinking, he blasted a grenade onto one of the rooftops buildings, sending chunks of concrete tumbling to the ground. When Travis switched to M4 rounds, his suppressing fire was equally relentless, which gave Kubicki and Meringue enough time to help the wounded. With one rooftop silent, after stunned insurgents had experienced the crushing power of Travis's grenades and countless M4 rounds, the battle's tide began to turn. Siegel and Albino couldn't see Travis firing, but they could hear the welcome sounds of the American counterattack, which only paused when Travis needed to reload. "Go!" Travis screamed to his fellow officers, who moved into new positions so they could join him in firing at the enemy. Travis, moving east in the alleyway from the Humvee's passenger side to the driver's side as he blasted away at another rooftop, was now causing the same kind of pandemonium among the enemy that the sniper had initially wrought on the Americans. Just in front of Siegel, the corpsman, initially pulled to safety by Travis and Kubicki, dragged himself almost completely under the vehicle with only his legs sticking out. Desperately trying to breathe while tasting a mixture of sand and his own blood, Albino was almost certain he was going to die. Amid dizziness, extreme thirst, and the crashing sounds of concrete, the wounded corpsman pictured his mother, whom he didn't want to suffer in the wake of his death. But at the same time, Albino could see Travis's boots firmly planted in the sand while he fired at enemy positions. The situation was bleak, but maybe there was still a chance to survive. So you got Travis. It's interesting, they use the word counterattack. And usually when you think of a counterattack, you think of a platoon or at least a squad that's maneuvering to counterattack an enemy. And in this situation, we got a one-man counterattack. That's the initiative. It's Travis stepping up, putting down suppressive fire, putting down grenade fire, exposing himself to the enemy to make that happen.
Well, trying to build the momentum the other way, because the momentum's coming in so much so on the other side that you got to sort of get out and get it on them, get the rounds on them.
Yeah.
To have them, lose that momentum.
Yeah, and just like any military unit, the insurgents, if they have the upper hand, they're going to press. But the minute you can press them back and you get the upper hand, the chances are they're gonna retreat, because they're not holding the ground. They don't care if they lose ground; they'll run away. They want to live. They're cowards, and so they'll back away. But if you don't do that, if you don't step up and you don't take the initiative, they will absolutely overrun you. They'll overrun you. And so Travis, one-man counterattack here, and then he's yelling to his teammates, "Hey, go, help out, let's go, let's make this happen." Back to the book. Although the sniper would usually have been long gone by now, the AK-47 fire from other buildings caused so much initial confusion that the MIT team still wasn't sure which building he had fired from. Like a vulture circling his prey, the enemy marksman continued scanning the alley before spotting Travis, who's firing away on another rooftop. So this is a cover and move situation too, where the sniper's taking precision shots, but the guys can't really identify because they're getting shot at from a bunch of different locations as well. Back to the book. Across the city, First Lieutenant Kim was handing crayons to smiling Iraqi kids with Second Lieutenant Alexander. Though Kim wondered how Travis and the guys were faring inside the pizza slice, they had been through so many battles in the last 5 months without a casualty that the MIT team seemed indestructible. As Kim knelt with a happy child, he suddenly heard unintelligible screaming from the radio inside his vehicle. "Contact!" yelled a voice, possibly Staff Sergeant Perry, the driver of the Humvee Kim was originally supposed to be in. Kim looked straight at Alexander, who had heard the same frantic sounds, and both men motioned to their Iraqi counterparts to sit with the kids while they checked things out. The transmissions were broken, but now the sound of Petty's voice screaming "contact" came through crystal clear. Without saying a single word about what to do next, Kim and Alexander jumped into separate vehicles with their respective drivers, told the Iraqis to handle the rest of the school supply drop, and sped toward the pizza slice and its unknown turmoil. As they listened to broken radio transmission and tried to communicate with Perry, who was frantically trying to contact Camp Fallujah and request a quick reaction force, the Marines silently navigated through the pizza slice's narrow, confusing streets, not completely sure of where their MIT team brothers were pinned down. They knew a battle was raging, but neither Marine had any idea how serious it was, nor did they realize Albino and Siegel had been hit. After looping around the pizza slice, the two vehicles turned right onto Route Elizabeth near the Blackwater Bridge, heading east, and the seriousness of the situation slapped Kim and Alexander in the face. The normally bustling, packed marketplace was completely empty. If tumbleweeds had blown across the street, this section of Fallujah would have looked exactly like a deserted town in an old Western spaghetti. "Jesus Christ," Alexander said. "Where the fuck are they?" Kim yelled in frustration. Suddenly they heard gunfire. "There," Alexander said, pointing at the besieged alleyway where the two American Humvees were still being riddled by bullets. As both Marines stopped on Route Elizabeth facing east, the Marines jumped out and ran as quickly as they could, ducking as rifles continued to crack towards their comrades. Kim then confronted an image that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Travis was lying near the back of the driver's side tire of the Humvee he had been riding in, his eyes wide open but glazed over with emptiness. Kim saw no blood, but it was obvious that something horrible had occurred in that wretched, violent alley. For the first time in the entire deployment, sheer panic seized Kim as he ran with Alexander up to Kubicki, who was kneeling by Travis while firing his 9mm handgun at one of the buildings after running out of rifle ammunition. Kim asked, firing his own rifle, "Where do you need us to go?" "Get the wounded," Kubicki said. "Get them out of here." "Who else is hit?" Alexander said. "Siegel and Doc," Kubicki said before moving to another position to continue firing. Swinging open the passenger side back door for cover as he fired, Kim saw Siegel, who had avoided being shot again but was still in great pain, lying in the back seat. Despite being on his back, he was reaching down to the floor trying to find more ammunition for the turret gunner. His left wrist was bleeding profusely. "The Major ordered us out," Kim said. "Do you need help?" "I can make it," Siegel said. "You got to get Lieutenant Manion." "I think he's dead." "My vehicle is right over there," Kim said, pointing toward Route Elizabeth. "Go." Now that reinforcements had arrived, the sniper was gone, and the insurgents were pulling back. Siegel, mustering all his strength, exited the Humvee on the passenger side and hurried to Kim's vehicle, where he collapsed in the back seat. He knew he had been shot in the stomach by this point and wasn't sure if he would make it. But even Siegel ran to the intersection Even as Siegel ran to the intersection, the wounded Marine's thoughts were focused on the unforgettable scene he had just witnessed. Siegel didn't see Travis get shot by the sniper, but after dragging himself to the driver's side of the vehicle, the lance corporal was shocked to see the first lieutenant lying face down and motionless, his arms stretched toward the curb with his feet facing toward the bullet-riddled vehicle. When Siegel pulled himself towards Travis and asked him where he'd been hit, he got no response. He realized Travis was seriously wounded and started feeling underneath his fellow Marine's body armor with his left hand, despite the hole in his own aching wrist. He found a bullet wound on the left side of Travis's rib cage. He whispered in Travis's ear. "Hey, Travis," said Siegel, who normally would have addressed him as Lieutenant or Sir, "I'm here for you." Travis didn't respond. Even without realizing that the sniper's bullet had struck the first lieutenant from the right side and had exited at the spot he was covering with his left hand, Siegel knew the situation was grave when Travis began jerking with convulsions. "Is he dead?" Kubicki yelled over to Siegel while continuing to fire at enemy positions. "Not yet, but he will be if we don't do something," the lance corporal said, his voice shaking. Siegel turned to Travis, whose eyes were still wide open. "I'm here for you," Siegel repeated over and over again into his ear. As soon as Kim and Alexander had carried their unresponsive friend into the vehicle, Kubicki ran over and dove into the smoke-filled Humvee, where he clutched Travis and began trying to identify his wounds, stopping the bleeding, and perform CPR. He ordered Petty to start driving towards Camp Fallujah while Wilson fired the last rounds from the turret. This was probably Kubicki's last chance to save his fellow Marine. As 4 vehicles sped toward Camp Fallujah, Father John Gayton, a Marine Corps chaplain from Pennsylvania, sat in his tiny office on the makeshift American base. He was reading emails from home while sipping from a large water bottle to keep hydrated on the steamy Sunday afternoon. A few minutes later, his phone rang. "We got 2 wounded in action and 1 possible killed in action arriving at the field hospital," a nurse reported. As the Marines ran over to the wooden complex, he saw a group of Marines. Kim, Alexander, Kubicki, Meringue, Petty, Marquette, Wilson, and Briner huddled like a team on a football field. As he jogged by, one of them turned around and looked at him. Father John saw the redness in the eyes of this Marine, who had obviously been crying. It was clear that something terrible had happened. "Any Marines with type O positive blood report immediately to Field Hospital Room 4, a voice said over the loudspeaker. As they tore off his bloody fatigues before finding the wounds on each side of his rib cage and trying to resuscitate him, crowds began to form in the hallway outside the operating room. Word was quickly spreading that First Lieutenant Travis Manion, the heart and soul of the MIT team, was badly wounded.
Yeah, he's gave it all, gave it all that day, gave it all every moment he was over there in working with the Marines, working with the Iraqis, and that last event, he ran out of ammo. I was talking to the gunner and start to ask him about what he saw, trying to figure out, we've got what was written up in his award and just trying to get some insights. And the gunner said, Lieutenant was calling for more ammo. So I'm thinking that Travis, I saw when he was over there, he had all sorts of magazines. So I don't know how many rounds, but I'm guessing around maybe 90 to 100 rounds he had on himself. And he'd actually laid down a lot of fire to change the momentum. But he knew what he was doing. He exposed himself. He had to do that to get out there and lay down the fire. And when I spoke to the gunner, Wilson, he said, we threw out a magazine. I turned around. When I turned back, Travis was laying on the ground. So maybe he was trying to get that magazine and load it into his weapon. He'd run out all of his ammunition and lay in cover for these guys.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, just somebody had to turn the momentum.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they were going to get overrun.
Yeah, and he knew that. He knew that. If not me, then who? He knew what he had to do. I know that because they had lost. I got a letter from Kubicki shortly afterwards, and he said, we're using Travis's words to go on because they had lost some guys, and he had pulled the team in and said, look, they'd want us to go on. We got to keep working. We got to turn the tide here. And so he used that session that Travis had with the team and said, look, you know what Travis would think. You know what we got to do. We got to keep fighting on. And that's what they did.
Father John anointed Travis's feet and said a prayer as the medical staff tried feverishly to revive him. If only the Marine could show the doctors some sign, any sign of life. Soon after, the physician in charge announced the time of death. For the next minute, the only sounds heard in the operating room came from the hallway outside. As doctors and nurses watched in silence, Father John, standing above the fallen U.S. Marine, broke the silence. God, the Father of mercies, through the death and resurrection of your Son, you have reconciled the world to yourself and sent the Holy Spirit among us for the forgiveness of sins, he said, looking down at Travis. Through the ministry of the church, may God grant you pardon and peace. And I absolve you of your sins in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. One by one, Marines filed past their fallen brother. Kubicki, the senior officer who had desperately administered CPR in the Humvee, was the first to walk by. Meringue was next, then Wilson, Marquette, and Briner. When Petty looked at the fallen first lieutenant's face, he saw an officer who had given everything to the Marine Corps. When Alexander approached the operating table with tears streaming down his face, he put his hand on his friend's head. He didn't know how the mission could carry on without him. Kim approached the table with weak knees and a broken heart. He paused to take one last look at his friend who had saved his life by volunteering to go on a patrol he knew would be far more dangerous than a school supply drop. Pausing for a moment, Kim pondered the story that was already spreading throughout the hospital complex. Without thinking twice, Travis had leapt squarely into enemy crosshairs to direct gunfire away from his patrol. On April 29th, 2007, a line of the Iraq War was struck down by a single bullet. Cut through Travis's aorta, causing massive internal bleeding that couldn't be controlled. Though the fallen Marines' loved ones would undoubtedly suffer, everyone else on the Pizza Slice patrol was still alive. Indeed, by fearlessly protecting his Marines and the Iraqis serving beside them, First Lieutenant Travis Manion had done his part.
Yeah, so clearly in writing this is sort of, as a father, obviously really tough to go through and talk to the guys that were with him and relive that. But the other side of it is it's a little healing to just sort of know exactly what was going on and what the guys that were there with him felt about his actions that day. And so, as I went through, I struggled at times. But I realized that, unless we tell these stories, the rest of the country's not going to know what these guys are doing. So we got to make sure that we get the word out there. And there was a big part of it is sitting down and talking through that day. Big part of the struggle for me in putting this book together.
And you just, I mean, it's a I would say it's a miracle that everyone else lived, but it's actually just Travis that everyone lived in a situation like that, surrounded by enemy, a sniper, multiple enemy positions firing on you. You got 9 guys and 2 Humvees. That is not a good situation to be in, and it's going to take a miracle to get out of it. And the fact that he's the only guy that was killed is incredible, and it's clearly, due to his actions. Clearly. I mean, again, the enemy has elevated positions too.
Yeah, they were on the rooftops, and yep.
So, yeah, I mean, it's important, obviously, to tell the story and people to know the sacrifice. And I mean, a lot of people listen to this that are active duty in the military, and that sort of aggressiveness on the battlefield when things are going bad is going to keep people alive. And obviously, you got to be a courageous human being to do that. But the alternative, in this case, would have been incredibly horrible.
I got it. Several of the guys were there, whether it was the doc when I went to see him at Bethesda, talked about the impact of what Travis did, or Lieutenant Meringue was there, and he sent me a message and said, hey, there's no doubt in my mind that Travis saved my life and the life of the entire patrol that day. So, I mean, the guys that were there were with him. They know what happened.